just for the sake of clarity, I enjoyed this sermon so much and got some positive feedback that when I found out that the camera did not record properly, I wanted to redo it, which is happening now. There's nobody here. This is just for you at home. When I was growing up, every summer we would go down to Padre Island. We went to North Padre Island, right around Corpus Christi, Texas. It's the Gulf. It's a beach. It works. We enjoyed it. But it was just my mom and me. And we had a great time every summer. Sometimes she'd invite one of my friends to go with us, and we just had a great time. But growing up with a mom who's a photographer, I was into it also. And at least a couple of days on that trip, we would get up before the break of dawn. And we would take our cameras and we would go sit on the beach and wait for the sunrise and just take these immaculate moments and capture them. And it was phenomenal. Here we are, nobody's out because we're on vacation and everybody's trying to sleep in, and she's got her tripod and her camera, and I'm standing next to her with my tripod and my camera, and we would capture those first moments of the sun, the glorious sun coming up over the horizon. You really can't beat it. You can't define what's happening in that moment. As we've been working through this conversation on the wonders of the universe and sort of nerding out on the science and everything, it's in that moment that you just can't quite explain what's going on. In fact, what's so interesting about that moment is that those first few minutes of the sun coming up over the horizon with the waves breaking in front of you and the smell of the sea and the salt and the breeze coming off the ocean, what's happening in those first minutes is not actually you seeing the sun. In fact, it is the light bending around the atmosphere of the earth, and it's showing you what's coming. But the sun's not actually there yet. It is an amazing moment, and we can't quite put it into words. And the reality is, you're not even actually seeing the sun come up over the horizon. Only the flickering of its light. You see, light takes time to travel. We didn't know that for a long time. We just assumed that it was present. But we learned that light takes time to travel, about 300 kilometers per second. 300,000 kilometers per second light travels at. We can't match that. That would break some rules of our universe. But this light gives us beauty that we can't quite comprehend. In fact, everywhere you go, everything you see, everything that we look at, that we wonder and awe and gasp at the sight of the beautiful waterfall or whatever it is the light reflecting or light emanating from that object. Everything. Light determines those awe moments. I am fascinated with light. I look forward. Someday, at some point, it is coming. I don't know when and I don't know how, but on my bucket list, there's two things I want to see that you can only see in certain places around the globe. One of them are the northern lights. The northern lights, the aurora borealis, we can explain it with our science. Yes, the cosmic rays break on the magnetic field of our atmosphere, and it interacts and causes these charges in particles of different elements in our atmosphere, creating these colorful, beautiful wistful cloud-like moments across a dark sky. But that doesn't capture what's happening. That doesn't capture the experience. And it is on my list of things to do because light has such amazing properties and an awe-inspiring moment. Another one, have you heard of this cloud? There's a special cloud, it's called a noctilucent cloud. It is a mesospheric cloud that is up so high that most of the time we can't really see it, and most of the time we just it's out of our purview. But at the right time of day, in the right location, with the right noctilucent clouds, the sun, after it has set, will still light the upper atmosphere of the mesosphere and will light up these clouds. And it looks like everything else, the sun is gone, the sun is dark, but here are these bright, light, well-lit clouds in the upper atmosphere. And it is an experience that I long for. To see those awe-inspiring moments is what light does. In fact, the ability to see light is what has given us and every other living thing on earth, animal that sees, has given it a competitive advantage. Some of the earliest life forms that we find had only the ability to distinguish light from dark, but that was enough to give it a competitive advantage to survive and either be prey or run from its prey. Just the ability to distinguish light from dark. Our eyes interpreting what is happening out in the light world gives us an advantage over the world around us. Light is truly a wonder of the universe. So it is no wonder with all of this going on, with everything that we see and the beauty and the magnitude and the interpretation that light has as a sense of ours. It is no wonder that we have always, for many, many years, thousands, millennia of years, we have identified light with God, or with divinity if we don't speak of a God, or with the supernatural if we don't speak of a divine being. But always light has been connected to the good or to God. And always it is a matter of light conquering the pain and the suffering and the darkness in our experiential lives, not just in a physically dark world, but in an emotionally and psychologically dark world. Light plays a role in literature. We speak metaphorically of running from the dark, of running to the light. We say things when we move into understanding. We say things like seeing is believing. In fact, we speak about today in all of what we do in terms of modern science, in terms of the modern scientific method, which is not just science, but how we view the world, we talk about seeing and believing. Light plays a role in all of that. It is the reference to light, but it misrepresents, and this is what gets really interesting, it misrepresents our life with God. Because we want to say seeing is believing, but it actually pulls us away from what's really going on. You see, light is intrinsically built into our understanding of who God is. In fact, hundreds of references to Jesus as light. Jesus, the light of our world, over and over again. You see, when we talk about seeing and the opportunity to have light expose different things in our world, it changes how we think about our faith. Even Paul, so last week we talked about creativity, we talked about Paul understanding from the cosmos. He says, no one is without exception. For since the creation of the world, his eternal power and his divine nature has been clearly seen. You see, Paul is relying on this argument of seeing is believing, and he falls into this trap a little bit in doing that. Not to say that we don't go and look and observe and enjoy God's creation and understand that it is light that brings that to us, but it is in fact something greater in that experience of light that is to be held on to. So he falls into this little bit of a seeing is believing that creeps into his theology here. And Jesus has a different statement about seeing. Jesus, as much as light is a part of anyone's psyche in talking about who God is, Jesus wants to take this from a different direction and talk about faith being separate from this light or seeing paradigm. I hate to do this because, this poor guy, Thomas, gets a really bad rap. If we open up, and this is where we're gonna find Jesus countering this seeing is believing moment. If we open up to John chapter 20, we find that Jesus has revealed himself to all of the disciples. And they all get to see and speak to and touch, maybe. And they all get to experience and view Jesus. But the text tells us, but Thomas wasn't there. And the poor thing, because what we've done is we've titled above this section in most of our Bibles, we've put this giant title, Doubting Thomas. Now, that is what he's doing. There's no way around that. But the reality is that all of the other disciples got to see Jesus, and Thomas doesn't. And I think he responds like many of us would like to respond. Here's how it goes. This poor guy. He says, the text reads, verse 24, but Thomas, sometimes called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. The other disciples told him, we saw the Master. But he said, unless I see the nail holes in his hands, put my finger in the nail holes, and stick my hand in his side, I won't believe it. You see, Thomas has fallen into the same trap that many have fallen into, that seeing is believing. And later, this is what's interesting about this. You see, Thomas has fallen into the same trap. And what's interesting about this is that we have taken this seeing and believing, and we have run with it just like Thomas. Sometimes it's interesting to see. Sometimes it's interesting to see how similar to somebody with the complete opposite view we have. Has anyone heard the term apologetics? Is that familiar? One of the things that pains me about the church, about our history, is our response to those on the outside. Apologetics is our response to those on the outside, and, to be honest, many times our response to ourselves. Apologetics is the process of proving or attempting to prove that God exists. You could have any type, apologetics could go into any field of study or something like that. But in terms of Christian apologetics, we would say apologetics is the process or the study of proving that God exists. And beyond that, we're going to prove not just that God exists first, we're going to prove that God is a personal God, because we believe that, and that God saves. And so we're going to have this is interesting, you ready? We're going to have this very scientific approach to our faith in proving who God is. Apologetics is the modern form of Thomas saying, unless I see, I will not believe. What we think, and this has done huge amounts of harm to our faith, to our own faith, to the church as a whole. It's done harm with our relationship with those that don't go to church. It's done harm with our relationship between faith and the scientific world and the scientific community. Interestingly enough, even though we are approaching it with a very scientific method approach. This is a very modern approach. That is one that takes the scientific method and says, here's how we walk through and test and prove that God is real and that God is personable and that God intends for you to respond, to be saved, and to have eternal life. Here's what it does to us. It tells us that we get to see before we believe. It tells us that we can go tell somebody else how they can see so that they believe. It is the modern equivalent of Thomas telling these guys, unless I see and touch and feel and experience physically Jesus' hands, Jesus' side, then I won't believe it. Apologetics has done that, and it has ripped a gaping hole in the faith experience of our churches. It has ripped a hole in how we understand who God is. It's ripped a hole in what we talk about when we talk about God. The question, can you prove it? No, you experience it. Proof is about seeing. Proof is about testing. Apologetics is the same thing, and it has torn us apart. The thing here is that Jesus wants to look at a new way. Jesus wants to say, okay, let's back up a second, because it's not just touching and feeling and seeing and experiencing in a physical way. It is about something more. And what he says to Thomas when he sees him a few days later, he says, his disciples were again in the room. This time Thomas was with them. And Jesus came through the locked door, stood among them, and said, "Peace to you." Then he focused his attention on Thomas. You see, there's no rebuke yet. It is, let me give you what you need to believe. He says, take your finger and examine my hands. Take your hand and stick it in my side. Don't be unbelieving, believe. And Thomas said, my master, my God. And Jesus says to him, so you believe because you've seen with your own eyes. Even better blessings are in store for those who believe without seeing. You see, all this time we've been trying to present faith to an outside world. I don't like that word, outsiders or insiders, but to those that aren't here, that don't believe, that don't wish to be in church, we've attempted to express our faith in modern scientific terms so that they could understand and then believe. Because we think if they could just get this piece wrapped around their head, that knowledge leads to belief. But you see, Jesus says very strikingly, it's not about your knowledge. It's not about your sight. It's not about touching and proving. It is about believing and having faith in something that is often intangible. What I love about that moment of the sun rising up over the sea as it peaks above the horizon is that it's not there yet. What you experience in that moment feels like sight. It feels like knowledge. It feels like something tangible and real, but it's actually not yet there. But the experience over you doesn't have to do with your touching and your knowledge of how the sun's light bends over the curvature of the earth's atmosphere. It has to do with experiencing the beauty of this unexplainable light, the beauty of this unexplainable moment with the waves crashing and the foam building up and the smell of the sand mixed with the salt of the sea and the breeze that's wisping through your hair. And in that moment, the light peeking up over that horizon in a way, creating colors that you can't explain and you can't describe. It is not about the knowledge of the sun in that moment. It is about the experience. And if we can pull this back a second, it is about the experience of faith in knowing something that you can't describe, you can't explain, you can't quite grasp. The experience is something different than the knowledge and the proof of what you are experiencing. Apologetics has ripped that away from us, torn experience and left it in the dust. But Jesus tells Thomas, it is better if you don't have the holes in my hand and still believe. Because life is not about the proof of what you're experiencing. It is about the feeling and the experience of God working in it and around you and within you and within your relationships. God doesn't seek to prove that experience. And when we begin to do it on God's behalf, we undo the beauty and the magnitude and the wonder of who God is. As that sun peaks up over the ocean, we experience something raw, something real. That moment is the moment of faith when we go, who is this God? That's what our faith is about, and it is a wonder, just like the light of this world that gives us all kinds of unexplainable beauty. It is a wonder to know and experience and to feel God. That's what this is about.